Daniel had not planned to crash on this strange world. His ship had been hit by an unexpected storm while crossing the outer rim of the galaxy, and the controls had failed before he could stabilize the craft. The descent was rough, the sky burning with fire as the ship tore through the atmosphere. By the time it skidded across the rocky surface and came to rest against a ridge, Daniel was bruised, shaken, and alone. The first day after the crash was a blur. His supplies were limited and the air was filled with a faint mineral taste that made breathing heavy. Still, the readings on his suit confirmed the planet was safe enough for survival. He patched his wounds as best he could, set up a small camp near the wreck, and promised himself that he would hold on until rescue came. On the second day, as he searched the nearby terrain for food and water, he heard a faint sound that did not belong to the wind. It was soft, almost like a cry, carried across the jagged stone fields. At first he thought it was an echo of his imagination, the result of hunger and exhaustion. But the sound came again, fragile and desperate. He followed it, climbing over ridges and through narrow gaps until he found the source. Beneath a cluster of fallen crystal-like rocks lay a figure. It was small, almost childlike, though not human. The skin glimmered faintly under the light of the twin suns, pale and smooth like silver glass. Long hair, nearly white, spilled across the stones, and large eyes blinked weakly as if the effort of staying awake was too much. She was pinned beneath the weight of the jagged formations, her chest rising and falling with difficulty. For a moment, Daniel froze. He had never seen anything like her. His training told him to be careful. That first contact with alien life had to be measured and cautious. Yet, as he watched the girl's lips tremble in pain and her hands claw faintly at the rocks, his heart moved faster than his mind. "You'll be all right," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand. He dropped his pack and began pulling at the heavy crystals. They were sharp and awkward, cutting his gloves and straining his muscles. He tried pushing, then lifting, and when that failed, he used a piece of metal from his ship as a lever. His arms burned with effort, sweat running down his face despite the cool wind of the planet. Still, he kept going. At last, the largest shard shifted, rolling aside with a crack. The girl gasped, her small chest expanding with a deeper breath as the weight lifted from her. Daniel quickly freed the rest, then pulled her gently into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile, almost weightless, as though her bones were thinner than human bones. Her silver eyes opened wider, fixing on him. For a moment she did not move, only stared, and Daniel felt as if she was searching his soul. Then slowly her hand rose and touched his arm. The gesture was simple, but it carried a strange warmth that eased the tension in his chest. He carried her back to his small camp where the fire flickered weakly against the wind. There he cleaned her cuts with his limited medical supplies, wrapping them with soft fabric torn from his own clothing. She winced but did not pull away. Instead, she watched him closely, her expression a mix of curiosity and trust. Daniel gave her water from his canteen, guiding it carefully to her lips. She drank with slow gulps, then leaned back against the improvised bedding he had made from insulation sheets. Her eyes fluttered closed, but her breathing was steady now, no longer shallow and weak. That night, as the two suns dipped below the horizon and the sky turned deep violet, Daniel sat by the fire and looked at the girl sleeping near him. He wondered who she was, what kind of people she belonged to, and how far they might be from this place. A part of him feared that helping her could bring danger. If her people found him, would they see his actions as kindness or intrusion? But another part of him knew there was no choice. He could not have walked away from her. As the stars stretched across the sky, Daniel sighed and leaned back against a broken piece of hull. The girl stirred, murmuring something in a soft language he did not know. He smiled faintly, realizing that even across the vast distance of space, some things remained the same. A child in pain still needed help, and a human heart could not ignore that. When the fire dimmed and the night grew cold, he placed his jacket over her small frame and whispered, "You're safe now. I'll look after you." He did not know then how those words would change his fate, or that saving one small life would draw the attention of an entire tribe. For now he only knew that he was not alone anymore, and that was enough. Daniel woke to the pale light of dawn breaking across the strange horizon. The two suns were climbing slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. For a moment he forgot where he was. The silence of the alien world was so complete that it felt almost peaceful. Then he remembered the girl. She was still asleep beside him, wrapped in his jacket, her silver skin glowing faintly in the new light. Her breathing was calm now, not ragged like before. He studied her quietly, wondering again who she was. Her face, though alien, carried a softness that reminded him of children he had seen back on Earth. She looked fragile, yet there was something bright in her presence, as if she carried a hidden strength. When she stirred, Daniel quickly handed her a small piece of ration food. She looked at it curiously, tilting her head before mimicking him as he bit into his own portion. She chewed slowly, and though her expression was unreadable, she did not reject the taste. Her large eyes followed his every move, and Daniel realized she was watching him closely, trying to learn. Later, as he worked on repairing a broken scanner from his wreck, she crouched near him. She touched the metal tools with her delicate fingers, then pointed at them as if asking their names. Daniel chuckled softly. "This is a spanner," he said, holding it up. She repeated the word clumsily, her voice soft but clear. Then she pointed at the scanner. "Scan near?" Her attempt surprised him. She was learning, quickly. Throughout the day, she imitated more words, repeating them until her tongue shaped the sounds better. Water, fire, sky, even his own name, though it came out as Danielle in her gentle accent. Each time she succeeded, she smiled faintly as if proud of herself. Daniel found himself smiling more than he had in weeks. He had been alone for too long, drifting through empty space, then stranded on this world. Now, with this small companion by his side, the silence of the planet no longer felt so heavy. As night returned, a storm swept across the land. Dark clouds rolled in and sharp winds rattled the broken pieces of his ship. Daniel quickly secured the shelter he had built from wreckage and guided the girl inside. The thunder outside echoed like drums across the valley, but inside the firelight made the air warm. The girl huddled close to him, her eyes wide at each flash of lightning. Without thinking, Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly. She looked up at him, and though she probably did not understand the words, she seemed to understand the meaning. Slowly, her tense shoulders eased, and she leaned against him as if trusting his presence more than anything else. Over the next days, their bond grew. Daniel taught her simple human words while she taught him sounds and gestures from her own language. Sometimes she would press her hand against his chest and say a word that sounded like Kalai. He guessed it meant protector or friend. Other times she pointed at the stars above and whispered a name he could not repeat. Perhaps it was her home. She showed him how to find edible plants that grew near the rocks, glowing faintly under the suns. She seemed to sense which ones were safe. When he tried to cut them awkwardly, she giggled, a small bell-like sound, and showed him the proper way. Daniel realized she was not only learning from him, she was teaching him too. At night, when he tried to repair his communication device, she would sit nearby, humming softly in her strange language. The sound was calming, almost like a lullaby. Sometimes Daniel wondered if it was meant to be a song of comfort or something sacred. Whatever it was, it made the loneliness of this world feel far away. But even as the days passed with quiet companionship, Daniel could not forget the questions pressing on his mind. Who was she? Where was her family? Was anyone looking for her? He doubted she had been alone before he found her. Someone would come eventually. One evening, as the two suns sank together beyond the ridge, Daniel caught her staring into the distance. Her eyes shone with a strange longing. She whispered something softly, words he could not understand, then pointed at the horizon. For a moment, her expression was filled with both hope and sadness. Daniel leaned closer, speaking gently. "Your people are out there, aren't they?" He did not expect an answer, but she nodded faintly as if she understood. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the broken ceiling of his shelter, listening to the faint breaths of the girl beside him. He knew that his act of saving her had tied their fates together. He had given her safety, and she had given him companionship. But he also knew this peace could not last forever. Somewhere beyond the horizon, her people were waiting. And when they came, he had no idea whether they would see him as a savior, or something else entirely. Daniel woke to the sound of movement, but it was not the soft shifting of the girl beside him. It was heavier, more measured, like many feet pressing against the rocky ground at once. The morning light was bright and the sky stretched wide and clear, but the Sound carried through the air in a way that made him sit up immediately. The girl was already awake, crouched near the entrance of their small shelter. Her silver eyes were fixed on the horizon, glowing faintly as if she had expected this moment. When Daniel followed her gaze, his chest tightened. Far across the ridge, a line of tall figures was moving toward them. At first, they looked like shadows stretched against the pale stone, but as they drew closer, Daniel could see their forms more clearly. They were women, taller than humans, their movements graceful but strong. Each carried a long spear carved from luminous crystal that caught the sun and reflected it like fire. Their hair streamed in the wind, white, silver, or pale blue, and their skin shimmered faintly just like the girls. Daniel's first thought was that he was surrounded. The figures fanned out as they approached, spreading in a half-circle that closed around his camp. Instinct made him reach for the nearest tool at his side, a broken piece of metal he had sharpened into a blade. But the girl turned quickly, placing her small hand on his wrist. She shook her head gently, her eyes steady as if telling him there was no need for fear. When the group came closer, the girl suddenly broke into motion. She darted forward, her small feet light against the stone, and rushed toward the tallest of the women. Daniel's breath caught as he watched her leap into open arms. The woman caught her easily, holding her close with a mixture of relief and affection. The sound that followed was unlike the cries of pain Daniel had heard days ago. It was laughter, ringing soft and clear. Daniel rose slowly, his heart pounding. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. The women did not attack. They stood in silence, their crystal weapons upright but still, their gazes steady and unreadable. He felt as though he was being measured, weighed not by one person but by an entire people. The girl pointed at him suddenly, her small hand outstretched. She spoke a word in her language, sharp and full of meaning. The tall woman holding her looked up at Daniel and their eyes met. Daniel could not read her completely, but there was no anger there, only curiosity and something that felt like respect. The woman set the girl down gently. Then she stepped forward, her long robe moving like water in the breeze. She placed the tip of her spear against the ground and lowered her head just slightly. It was not a bow like humans made, but it carried the same weight. Daniel blinked, unsure of what to do. His instincts told him to mirror the gesture, and so he lowered his head as well. The women murmured softly among themselves, their voices musical and layered, as though they were speaking both words and tones at the same time. The girl ran back to Daniel, tugging at his hand with a smile. She spoke quickly to the women, pointing to her chest, then to him. Daniel understood only fragments, but the meaning was clear enough. She was telling them he had saved her. One of the women stepped closer. She was older than the rest, her skin marked with glowing patterns that seemed etched into her body itself. Her presence commanded silence from the others. She studied Daniel for a long moment, her gaze sharp and thoughtful. Then she raised her hand, palm outward, and spoke. The girl translated in her broken, careful human words. Thanks you. For saving. Daniel's shoulders relaxed, though his mind still spun. He had expected anger or suspicion. Instead, they were showing gratitude. He glanced at the older woman again and saw something else in her eyes, a test perhaps, or an expectation he did not yet understand. The group did not leave immediately. They moved closer, forming a loose circle around Daniel's small camp. Some examined the broken pieces of his ship, touching the strange metals with fascination. Others knelt near the fire pit, running their fingers through the ashes curiously. Their behavior was careful, never hostile, as though they were guests rather than conquerors. The girl stayed close to Daniel, holding his hand tightly, guiding him as if he were the one who needed reassurance now. She laughed when one of the women tried to repeat his name, Daniel, in the same gentle accent she had used. By the time the suns reached their peak, the leader raised her hand again. The women stepped back into formation, their spears rising in perfect rhythm. The girl looked up at Daniel and spoke softly in her halting but clear words. Come with us. Daniel felt his chest tighten again. He looked at his wrecked ship, at the camp he had built from its remains, then back at the circle of women waiting for him. He knew the choice was not really his anymore. His act of saving the girl had tied him to her people, whether he was ready or not. He tightened the strap on his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and gave the girl a small nod. All right, he said quietly. Let's go. The women parted to make a path for him. and together they began walking toward the horizon. Daniel's heart pounded with every step, filled with both unease and wonder. He had wanted rescue, but what he had found instead was something far stranger. A tribe of women whose eyes held secrets, and whose voices carried a history he had yet to learn. The path to the tribe's settlement was long, but Daniel found himself walking without complaint. The women moved with quiet strength, their steps light even on the rough stone ground. They carried themselves with a balance that reminded him of trained soldiers, yet their movements felt more graceful than aggressive. The girl, who never left his side, skipped happily between him and the tall woman who seemed to lead the group. She clung to Daniel's hand one moment, then ran ahead to chatter in her native tongue the next, her silver eyes sparkling with excitement. Daniel could not understand her words, but he understood her joy. She was home. After hours of travel, the group descended into a wide valley where the land glowed with strange beauty. Towering crystal formations rose like frozen lightning from the ground, and streams of clear water flowed around them, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Daniel had never seen anything like it. It was not just a settlement, it was a sanctuary. Built into the walls of the valley were countless dwellings. They were carved from stone and crystal, lit with soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Women moved gracefully between them, some carrying baskets of fruit, others weaving shimmering cloth that reflected the suns. Children with the same silver glow as the girl played near the streams, their laughter rising like music in the air. When Daniel entered, all eyes turned to him. The chatter quieted. Some of the women looked at him with curiosity, others with cautious respect. No one stepped forward in anger, yet the weight of their stares made him feel as if every move mattered. The leader raised her hand, and the crowd parted as she guided Daniel toward a large hall carved into the largest crystal tower. Inside, the walls shimmered with colors that shifted like water. At the center sat an older woman, her hair pure white, her skin lined with glowing marks that pulsed faintly. Her presence filled the space like the calm before a storm. The girl rushed forward, leaping into her arms. The older woman embraced her tightly, a sound of relief escaping her lips. Then she looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. The leader spoke in their language, her tone measured and respectful. The older woman listened, her gaze never leaving Daniel. After a long silence, the girl wriggled free and hurried back to him. She touched his arm and spoke slowly, searching for the right human words. She says, "You save me, you give life." Daniel nodded, unsure what else to do. "I couldn't leave her," he said softly. The girl translated as best as she could, her voice trembling with effort. The older woman smiled faintly, then rose from her seat. She stepped forward with dignity, her glowing marks casting soft light across her skin. Slowly, she placed her hands together in front of her chest, bowing her head. Daniel froze, realizing this was no ordinary greeting. The hall filled with murmurs as the other women bowed their heads slightly as well. The girl looked up at him, her face bright with pride. "She is mother," the girl explained in her broken English. "She, leader." The truth struck Daniel like lightning. He had not rescued an ordinary child lost in the wilderness. He had saved the daughter of the tribe's matriarch, the leader of all these people. The older woman spoke again, her voice calm but commanding. The girl listened carefully, then turned to Daniel. She say, "Your act is sacred, not accident. Long time ago, our story tell of one who come from stars, who protect child of tribe." She paused, trying to shape the words. She say, "You are sign." Daniel felt his chest tighten. A prophecy? That was the last thing he had expected. He had acted on instinct, not destiny. Yet here he stood, being looked at not just as a stranger, but as someone their legends had foretold. The matriarch continued speaking, her tone heavy with meaning. The girl translated piece by piece, sometimes stumbling over the words. She say, "Your heart. Show strength. Not only in fight but in care." She say, "You change path of tribe." The hall was silent, every woman listening. Daniel's mind raced. He wanted to tell them he was no hero, that he had only done what any decent human would have done. But the way they looked at him, with respect, curiosity, even reverence, made him realize that denying it would not change their belief. The girl squeezed his hand gently. Her silver eyes shone with pride, and in that moment Daniel understood what mattered most. Whether prophecy or chance, His choice to save her had given him a place in her world. That evening he was given food, unlike anything he had tasted, fruits that glowed faintly in the dark, bread made from crystal grains that melted softly on the tongue, and sweet water that carried the taste of cool stone. The women treated him not as an intruder, but as an honored guest. Yet even in the warmth of their welcome, Daniel could feel the weight of expectation. The prophecy they spoke of was more than gratitude. It was a promise that his presence carried meaning for their future. As the night deepened and the crystal halls shimmered under the twin moons, Daniel lay awake in the chamber they had given him. The girl slept peacefully beside him, her small hand resting on his arm. He stared at the glowing ceiling, his thoughts heavy. He had saved one life, but now an entire tribe looked to him as something more. Protector, sign, fulfillment of an ancient story. He had not asked for this role, but it had found him. And in the silence of the night, he wondered if he was ready for what it demanded. The days that followed were unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. From the moment he entered the valley, the tribe treated him not as an outsider, but as someone chosen. Wherever he walked, eyes followed him. Some were filled with simple curiosity, others with deep respect. Children ran after him with laughter, calling his name in broken accents while the elders watched with quiet thoughtfulness. The girl rarely left his side. She guided him through the settlement, showing him the wonders of her home. She pulled him toward the glowing streams, dipping her hands into the water and offering it to him with a smile. When he drank, he was surprised at its sweetness, unlike any water he had tasted before. She laughed at his reaction, her silver eyes shining with joy. Everywhere he looked, Daniel saw harmony. The tribe lived close to the land, but their ways were advanced in ways he did not expect. Crystals powered light and warmth, their energy flowing through carved channels in the stone. Plants were cultivated in carefully arranged gardens, glowing softly as they grew in rhythm with the suns. The people's clothing shimmered as if woven from threads of light, yet it was soft and practical. Daniel realized this was no primitive community. They had built a way of life that balanced nature and knowledge. It was different from human cities filled with steel and noise, but in its own way, it was just as advanced, perhaps even more. The matriarch invited him to her hall often. She did not speak much directly to him, but her eyes studied him carefully whenever the girl translated his words. Sometimes she asked questions about his world, what humans ate, how they traveled, why they explored the stars. Daniel answered as simply as he could, though he felt his words were small compared to the vastness of her gaze. One evening, as the twin suns set, the tribe gathered in the central square. The air glowed with the light of hundreds of crystals, and the sound of drums echoed against the stone walls. Daniel sat among them, feeling both a guest and a part of something larger. Women danced in circles, their movements fluid and graceful, telling stories without words. The girl clapped along, pulling Daniel's hand until he stood awkwardly beside her. She laughed when he tried to mimic the steps, his human body too stiff for their flowing rhythm. But she stayed close to him, guiding his feet. The laughter that followed was not mocking but warm, and for the first time Daniel felt he truly belonged. Later that night, the matriarch spoke before the tribe. The girl translated quietly for Daniel. She say, "You are welcome. You are family now." The words struck deep. He had expected to remain a stranger forever, but now he was being invited into their lives. In the days that followed, Daniel was given a place to stay within the valley. The chamber was carved into crystal like the others, lit by a soft glow that never faded. The women brought him food, clothing woven in their style, and tools that seemed to respond to his touch as if alive. The girl insisted on teaching him their ways: how to gather fruit without damaging the glowing plants, how to weave simple patterns into cloth, and how to listen to the hum of the crystals that powered their homes. Daniel tried to teach her more human words in return. She repeated them eagerly, sometimes mispronouncing them in ways that made him laugh. In turn, she taught him her own language, pointing at objects and naming them until he could shape the sounds with his tongue. Their conversations were broken, a mix of two languages and gestures, but somehow they understood each other more than words allowed. Still, Daniel could feel the weight of the prophecy in every glance. Though the tribe treated him with kindness, there was always an unspoken expectation behind their eyes. He had not simply saved the girl. He had stepped into a role they believed was written for him. One afternoon, the matriarch called for him again. This time, the hall was quiet, only the girl and the leader inside. The matriarch spoke slowly, her voice calm but firm. The girl translated carefully. She say, "To stay with us, you must prove heart. Not just strength," she say. "There will be trials." To show who you are, Daniel's brow furrowed. Trials? He had survived a crash, saved a child, and walked into a world not his own. What more could they want from him? But when he looked at the girl who held his hand tightly and smiled with complete faith, he felt his doubts fade. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The girl repeated his words, her voice filled with pride. The matriarch nodded, her glowing marks pulsing faintly as if in approval. That night, Daniel sat outside his new chamber, staring up at the sky. The stars were strange here, patterns he did not know. Somewhere out there was Earth, his people, his old life. But here, in this valley of crystal and light, a new path had opened for him. He was no longer just a lost traveler. He was part of something larger, something he did not yet understand. The girl sat beside him, her small hand resting on his arm. She looked at him with a smile that was both simple and full of meaning. "You stay," she said softly in her careful human words. Daniel looked back at the stars, then at the glowing valley around him. For the first time, he found himself agreeing without hesitation. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll stay." The next morning, Daniel was woken by the sound of drums echoing across the valley. The girl was already standing near the doorway of his chamber, her silver eyes bright with excitement. She pointed toward the central square, motioning for him to follow. When he stepped outside, he saw the tribe gathered in a wide circle. At the center stood the matriarch, her tall figure glowing faintly in the early light. Around her were several women holding staffs of crystal, their expression serious. The girl whispered to Daniel in broken human words, "Today, trials start." Daniel's heart tightened. He had faced dangers before, storms, wrecks, even hunger, but this was different. These people were not his enemies, yet he had to prove himself worthy of their trust. He stepped forward, his back straight, his eyes locked on the matriarch. The first trial was of endurance. Two women stepped forward carrying bowls filled with glowing liquid. They painted strange marks across Daniel's arms and chest, the liquid humming faintly as it touched his skin. Then the matriarch raised her staff and the ground shifted. From the circle of stone rose tall walls, forming a narrow path that twisted into the mountainside. The girl explained with effort, "You walk. Long way, no stop. Path test spirit." Daniel nodded. He entered the path, the stone cool beneath his hands as he steadied himself. The air inside was heavy and strange, filled with echoes that did not belong to him. At times he thought he heard voices, his own, the girl's, even whispers from Earth. His legs grew heavy, but he kept moving. Hours passed. His throat burned, his body begged to rest, yet he remembered the girl's faith, the tribe's eyes, and the chance to belong. At last he stepped out into the light again, his body trembling but still standing. The tribe cheered, their voices rising like the wind. The girl rushed to him, her smile brighter than the crystals. The second trial came the next day. This was the trial of wisdom. The matriarch led Daniel to a chamber filled with crystals of every shape and size. They glowed with shifting colors, casting strange patterns across the walls. At the center stood a great crystal pulsing like a heartbeat. The girl whispered, "Crystal shows question. You must choose answer." Daniel placed his hands on the crystal. At once, images filled his mind. He saw his ship crashing, the girl reaching for him, the tribe surrounding him. Then he saw two paths, one where he turned away and left them, another where he stayed, standing beside them in times of danger. The voice within the crystal asked without words, "What is your choice?" Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered the warmth of the tribe, the laughter of the children, the trust in the girl's eyes. Slowly he spoke aloud, "I stay." The crystal glowed bright, sending a soft wave of light through the chamber. When Daniel removed his hands, the matriarch was watching. Her lips curved into the faintest smile and she gave a single nod. The final trial was the hardest. It was called the trial of courage. At dusk, Daniel was taken to the edge of the valley where the mountains rose steep and dark. The girl clung to his arm, her face filled with worry, but the matriarch's command was clear. Beyond the valley lived creatures of shadow, drawn by hunger and strength. Few dared to face them alone. Daniel's task was not to slay the beast, but to stand his ground without fear. As night fell, Daniel walked into the rocky pass. The only light came from a crystal tied to his wrist. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed heavily against him. Then he heard it, a low growl that echoed through the stones. The creature stepped into view, its body tall and covered in shifting scales that shimmered like smoke. Its eyes burned with a strange fire, and its claws struck sparks against the rock. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced his feet to stay still. He remembered the matriarch's words through the girl, not strength, heart. The beast circled him, growling, its tail lashing against the stones. Daniel raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. "I am not your enemy," he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. For a long moment the beast stared at him. Its glowing eyes narrowed, then it let out a deep snarl before turning away. It vanished into the darkness, leaving Daniel alone. When he returned to the valley, exhausted but alive, the tribe erupted into cheers. The matriarch lifted her staff high, and the girl ran forward, throwing her arms around him. "You did it," she cried in her careful human words, her voice shaking with joy. The matriarch stepped forward, her voice calm and strong. The girl translated softly, "She say, trials complete. You are one of us now." Daniel felt the weight of those words. He was no longer just a human stranded on a distant world. He was part of this tribe, tied to their lives, their hopes, and their future. That night, a great celebration filled the valley. Crystals shone brighter than ever. Music filled the air, and the tribe danced in circles around the fire. Daniel sat among them, his heart full. The girl leaned close, her voice gentle. "You stay forever?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, then at the people who had welcomed him, and he smiled. "Yes, forever." And as the stars shone above the valley, he knew he had found not just survival, but a new home. The days after the trials were filled with peace and celebration. Daniel had earned his place among the tribe, and for the first time since he had crashed on this alien world, he felt truly accepted. The people greeted him warmly. Children followed him with curiosity, and the girl never left his side. She translated for him when needed, and together they laughed as he tried to learn their songs and customs. But peace never lasted long on a strange world. One evening, while the tribe was gathering food near the river, a deep rumble shook the ground. At first Daniel thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound grew louder, echoing through the valley like the beating of drums. Then came the cries, sharp, frightened calls from the hunters who had gone ahead. Daniel rushed with the others to the ridge. What he saw froze his breath. A herd of massive beasts was charging toward the valley. Their bodies were covered in thick, dark hides, and their horns gleamed like blades. They trampled everything in their path, their eyes glowing with a wild light. The girl gasped and clutched Daniel's arm. In broken words, she whispered, "Stampede, destroy all." The matriarch raised her staff, calling for calm, but even Daniel could see the danger. The valley was narrow, and if the herd entered, they would crush the homes, the gardens, and the people. The tribe had faced many trials, but this was different. They had no time for rituals, no chance to prepare. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered his days as a pilot, trained to think fast in emergencies. He looked at the terrain, the rocky slopes, the narrow pass where the beasts were rushing. An idea struck him. It was dangerous, but it was the only chance. He turned to the matriarch, speaking quickly. The girl translated, her voice trembling. He says, "We block them. Make loud fire, push them away before valley." The matriarch's eyes narrowed as she studied him. Then she gave a slow nod. She trusted him. Daniel ran with a group of women to gather what they could. Dry branches, crystal shards, anything that could burn or flash. The girl stayed at his side, carrying smaller pieces, her face pale but determined. Together they built a line of fire at the edge of the pass. The rumble grew stronger. Dust rose into the air as the herd drew closer, their roars shaking the stones. Daniel's hands shook as he struck the spark crystal against the metal piece he had kept from his wreck. Flames burst to life, spreading quickly along the branches. Smoke rose, glowing with the strange colors of the crystals. The beasts thundered closer, their eyes wild. Daniel stood firm, shouting and waving his arms, trying to make himself look larger. The tribe joined him, their voices rising in chants, their staffs striking the ground. For a moment it seemed hopeless. The beasts did not slow. Then the fire roared higher, sparks leaping into the air. The smoke swirled in strange shapes, glowing brightly under the twin suns. The herd faltered. The lead beast bellowed, stamping the ground, but when the flames flared again, it turned sharply to the side. The others followed, crashing against the rocks and running along a different path, away from the valley. The ground shook as the herd passed, but the valley was safe. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire. Daniel's chest heaved with relief. The girl threw her arms around him, laughing through her tears. "You did it! Saved all!" she said, her words clearer than ever before. The tribe gathered, their eyes filled with gratitude. The matriarch raised her staff high, her voice carrying across the valley. The girl translated softly, her voice full of pride. She says, "You are not only one of us, you are protector of tribe." That night the celebration was greater than any before. The people danced, sang, and lit crystals that glowed like stars across the valley. Daniel sat among them, watching the joy on their faces. For the first time he felt not like a stranger, not like a survivor, but like family. The girl sat beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "When you fall from sky," she whispered in her careful words, "I think you spirit. Now, I know you human, but human with heart strong as mountain?" Daniel smiled, his eyes on the stars above. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I think this place made me stronger." The matriarch approached then, her tall figure shining in the firelight. She placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder and spoke slowly, her words firm. The girl translated with care. She says, "From this day your life is bound to ours. You walk with us, you fight with us, you live with us. You are tribe." Daniel felt a warmth spread through him. He had lost his old life, his ship, his world. But here, on this alien land, he had found something greater, a people who accepted him, a girl who trusted him, and a future worth protecting. As the fire crackled and the songs rose into the night, Daniel knew his journey was not over. There would be new challenges, new dangers, and perhaps even a way to send a signal back to the stars. But whatever came, he would not face it alone, for he was no longer just a man stranded far from home. He was Daniel, protector of the tribe, the human who had saved a girl, and in doing so had found a new family among the stars.